Welcome to this presentation where we will be looking at oilseed rape. When is it still a viable option? To help me cover this topic, I've got two of my colleagues. Rob Nightingale, who's going to look at oilseed rape management over the coming season and some of the risk mitigation strategies we can consider. And then David is going to look at variety choice. What varieties fit the marketplace that we find ourselves in? But first, I'm going to look at oilseed rape as a viable option. I think there's been considerable amount of debate over the last few months, most of which has been fairly negative about the crop. What I'd like to try and achieve here is that we look at all elements and we consider all issues so that we have a balanced approach to decision making. So let's consider the market. The market is strong. There is a lot of demand for vegetable oil, be that into food or biodiesel. So the end market hasn't changed. The only issue that we've got is the challenge of growing the crop. In the UK, there are 3 significant crushers of oilseed rape, and they have very, very high demand. 2 million tonnes at least, but that could increase. In terms of what are the future options for the crushing plant, their preference is always to have UK produced seed. But to keep those plants running, they have to consider imported seed. And currently there is a level of imported seed, as has been heard, that has come into the UK. But if you look longer term, what is the viability of that? As I say, their preference would be UK seed grown on UK farms. There's another market, which is the high heuristic market, where there's a lot of demand for that. That's going into a niche market, but again, I think it demonstrates the overall demand for oilseeds in the UK. There's one other key factor we should consider. The meal that comes out of the crush plants is a protein source, which goes into animal feed rations. And as we know, the UK and arguably the world is relatively short of protein. So if we are not in a position to crush rapeseed in the UK, then we would have to import protein from other sources. And that could be soya from other parts of the world. So if you look forward, what does this all mean? Well, there's a risk that we export production, i.e. the crop is grown and crushed in other parts of the world, or we export the processing, which would not be good for the long term of UK growers and the future of the crop. So if we look at the relative changes in cropping over the last few years, so really going back to 2012 right through to a projection for harvest 2021. If we take the blue lines at the top first, we look at winter wheat. So as far as winter wheat's concerned, we saw a big dip to harvest 2013. We went from just a touch over 2 million hectares down to about 1.5. That was as a result of the very difficult autumn of 2012. As you can see, from there on, it went back up, but then it's steadily reduced. This year, so harvest 2020, you can see another massive drop, and that's as a result of the very challenging conditions of last autumn. But we're predicting that next year that will bounce back, and we could see the total wheat acreage get close to 2 million hectares again. If we then look at spring barley, because there's been a lot of change in spring barley, you can see there was an uplift in spring barley from 2012 to 2013, and that was really a reflection of that difficult autumn of 2012. And overall, there's been a steady increase in spring barley ever since, clearly with a real spike this year, again due to those challenging conditions of last autumn. And then next year we think that will settle back to something similar to the previous year. But the direction of travel is upwards. Then if we look at oilseed rape, you can see that there was a dip in 2013, and then that's really continued to decline following the loss of the neonic technology. And where we're sort of projecting things for 2013 doesn't make for good reading, given the backdrop of the marketplace requiring rapeseed to crush. At the bottom of the slide, you can see oats and pulses. So winter oats and spring oats have increased over time, but they're relatively limited. And pulses, you can see, have increased, but not massively. There's demand for both, but not the sort of demand that we have for oilseed rape currently. And the gross margin achievable by the customer is limited compared with oilseed rape, if we can get the crop established. So let's look at oilseed rape in a bit more detail as far as gross margin is concerned. So if we look at the variable costs first, if you take seed, the range is somewhere between 45 and 75 pounds a hectare. Now clearly that depends a little bit on whether you go for a conventional variety or a hybrid variety. If we look at fertiliser, it's likely to be in the range of 180 to 210 pounds a hectare, and crop protection between 190 and 240 pounds a hectare. The crop protection one is very dependent on grass weeds, particularly blackgrass. So that's the kind of range that it's likely to be in. So overall, your variable costs, depending on those criteria, are likely to be between 415 and 525 pounds a hectare. So what does that mean in terms of gross margin? Well, a few years ago, we would have been putting yields of up to 5.5 tonnes a hectare against oilseed rape. I've not done that. I've really looked in the sort of range that we're probably seeing over the last 2 or 3 years. But what it shows is that oilseed rape at 2 tonnes a hectare would give you a gross margin of £190 a hectare. If it was 2.5 tonnes, it would give you £355 a hectare. And if at 3 tonnes, it would give you £520 a hectare. Now, if we can get to 4 tonnes a hectare, you can see £800 a hectare return, which really is very good. The price is strong. But if we work on 3 tonnes a hectare, which I think is achievable, very achievable, you can see there that the gross margin is actually very worthwhile focusing on. And it makes it the best gross margin for a break crop that there is. So the challenge clearly is to try and keep oilseed rape in the rotation and benefit from that gross margin. So let's just look at these production challenges. I think a lot of us have looked at cabbage stem flea beetle and spent a lot of time focused on cabbage stem flea beetle. Now, I don't want to belittle it in any way, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I do think we just need to look at some of these other areas. What is really driving the establishment challenge that we face? So region, geography is part of that. Soil type, previous cropping, the weather patterns that we face. But I think moisture is a key factor here. Can we actually retain the moisture in the soil that we need to? So cultivation strategy really does need serious consideration here. Our aim here is to ensure good seed soil contact and keeping that moisture there. If we just talk about nutrition for a moment, last year we had a huge wheat and barley harvest, very big yields, and as a result of that, a lot of nutrition was removed from soils. I think that was a key factor in last autumn's establishment. Clearly, drilling data is important, and a lot of people are looking at seed rates. But seed rates, I don't think is something that we need to spend too much time on here. I think that's fairly fixed. We really want to be working probably in the range of 40 to 100 seeds per metre square, depending on whether you're conventional or hybrid varieties. There's a lot about varieties. Strong autumn vigour is important. So David will talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. And clearly cabbage stem flea beetle is going to need management. So I don't want to deflect from that, but I do think at times cabbage stem flea beetle is seen as the primary problem. I think there are other primary issues we have to address first, and if we're able to get those right, then we can look at management strategies to deal with the cabbage stem flea beetle. So in summary, oilseed rape is really the only profitable autumn break crop. Appreciate we've got to be able to establish it and take it to harvest, but we do need to reflect on the fact that it is the most profitable break crop. It's vital in rotations. It allows us to maximise the first wheats that we have in our rotations. It also gives us another opportunity in terms of grass weed management. But it's also vital to ensure that dropping oilseed rape doesn't then result in us growing pulses too closely in rotation, because again that will create further challenges down the line in terms of soil-borne diseases. It spreads the workload. As I've covered, the crushing plants are very, very keen to have UK produced rapeseed, and it's their future that is critical to all of us. There are risks. I think they're very evident. I've covered a number of those. But can we manage those risks? I think that's the point that I'd like now to hand over to Rob to talk us through.
Thank you, Charlie. So yes, as we're well aware, I think oilseed rape is a very important crop to the UK farmer. What I would like to go through is a few factors that I feel are important in managing the crop, certainly from focusing on the flea beetle pest. So firstly, I mean, this is looking at drilling date and the risk associated with drilling date. I think what I don't allude to in what I'm talking about is moisture. So moisture I've not included in this purely because moisture is such a dominant factor that you have to have that good seed soil contact, as Charlie was mentioning. You need that moisture in the soil to get the crop growing. It's a very small seed, which we all know. So getting that moisture and making sure that it grows quickly and vigorously is the best time to drill the rape crop, regardless of all the bits around the pest. But in terms of drilling date, so what I've done here is put together a bit of a graph. The larvae pressure is the green line. So you've got an earlier drilling scenario around that traditional establishment period, which that's the end of August to the first week of September. If you drill earlier than that, typically you'll get a bigger crop, but you'll be the first crop that adult flea beetle land in, and you'll have longer period for the eggs to be laid in the crop through the year. So you'll have a higher risk from larval pressure. Drilling later than that traditional establishment period, you run the risk of running into the cabbage stem flea beetle migration, but you might miss the first peak of that. So actually by missing the peak and by having a crop that is growing less time, so there's less time for the accumulated temperatures to build up, you don't end up with a high larval pressure in that crop. So by drilling outside of those traditional establishment period, you get a different set of risks affecting you from the larval or from the adult stage of the pest. So what we've done is to produce a scenario planning tool. So the scenario planning tool is trying to take into account the risks and the specific points around your farm. So it talks around soil type, so light to medium to heavy soils, because these will each carry their own risks associated with them. So we know that heavy soils typically, if we haven't had a lot of moisture and we haven't had a lot of rain, they will sit very dry and they're very difficult to get into a good fine firm seedbed quickly. So that we take those into account, and we've given that each of those scenarios a score. So it covers previous crop, cultivation type, and then straw management. Once we've generated a tailored crop score for your farm or field, you can then associate a set of flea beetle management tactics based on a given drilling date. But if we look further into one of these points, so I'll look at straw management and just explain how changing straw management might help with your management of flea beetle and indeed its speed of establishment. So how you manage your straw, you've got sort of three main regions. You've got straw incorporated, you've got straw removed, so you've got short stubble and then all the straw material has been baled up, or you've got longer stubbles where you're taking your cereal harvest at a higher height. So typically above 15 centimetres is roughly the sort of height we're talking about here, but indeed 20 centimetres would be again taller, as obviously stated. The differences you have, so straw incorporated, so if you chop all your straw, you have a very short stubble and you have a lot of straw and chaff sort of spread across the field. That straw and chaff, once it's incorporated into the soil, there's a biological demand for the nitrogen that's in the soil. So you do lock up a little bit of nitrogen just in that top surface, just at the point where you're trying to get this oilseed rape crop growing. And we all know that oilseed rape responds very well to nitrogen. So you lose a bit of nitrogen at that crucial stage. You also have quite a short stubble. And stubble height, as you can see with the arrow of the wind going across, stubble height influences what that wind looks like at that soil surface. So having longer stubbles means that the wind doesn't penetrate as much. If anyone in a garden with a hedge around it will tell you that having a hedge around makes it a lot easier to have a barbecue in the summer. It's that type of effect. You have the wind whipping across the top of the soil surface, that's pulling moisture out and it's drying that crucial top surface where we're drilling the oilseed rape. Straw removed takes away then the end locking up onto the straw and the stubble that's incorporated. You have typically a cleaner seedbed, so most people know that if you've baled your straw, you typically have lower slug pressure. That's because you've taken that straw mat away. What it does mean is it typically delays your drilling date, so it gives you less drilling sort of time to pick that crucial rainfall, as I was mentioning earlier, and you have all the compaction from the balers and the pickup team. By leaving a long stubble, you take the straw out of the soil. So actually having tall stubble above the crop means that you don't have the straw incorporated into the soil until a point after the oilseed rape is established. So actually you have far less nitrogen lockup when you've left the straw above the crop rather than incorporated into the soil. You also have the benefit of the wind, which I've already discussed. So as I said, oilseed rape is very responsive to nitrogen inputs. We've done a series of trials for a number of years now looking at different starter fertilisers, and what I've put together here is just the sort of commonly available ammonium nitrogen and DAP or diammonium phosphate over and above the untreated. So the 0% is the untreated, and any increase in biomass by late October is when most of these assessments are done, is what you're seeing in the graph. So the AN does give you a good response, and we will see bigger biomass crops from ammonium nitrogen, but DAP really gives us that consistent response, and as you can see across all of those bars, it outperforms AN every time. So we'd really encourage using diammonium phosphate at that early timing, and ideally spread either before the drill or incorporated with the drilling, and if you can place it, all the better. What we've typically seen in these trials is a 35% biomass increase from the DAP. So if you average all those bars, it's 35% biomass increase. You also have found a 0.36 tonne a hectare yield improvement from that DAP at the early establishment phase as well. But it's really this biomass increase we're looking at, and having a bigger crop by the end of October will set it up for, it gives you that ability to cope with some of the adult grazing earlier on, and it also gives you an ability to deal with some of the larval grazing through the season. So companion cropping has been a bit in vogue recently. I think it's been looked at for a long time, particularly around the last point there of improving crop nutrition. But really, the way I see companion cropping is it's part of the solution. It's by no means a silver bullet, but it will help with establishing your oilseed rape crop. So it's got three main areas. So you're disguising the oilseed rape crop. Now, what I mean by that is not so much disguising it as wearing a mask. It's about masking the scent of the oilseed rape. So oilseed rape emits a set of volatile compounds from when it's growing, and this is what all the cabbage stem flea beetle use to find the crop. So if you can mask those scents, particularly with a fenugreek, for example, that'll help you with put your flea beetle off from migrating into your crop. You can attract beneficial insects. So what's pictured here is a crop of buckwheat and oilseed rape, and then some Bursian clover in the bottom. Buckwheat's very quick to go to flower, so you get some lovely open small flowers, which is what the parasitic wasps and the beneficials need as a pollen nectar source. So the adults eat pollen and nectar, that is what keeps them going, and then they go around and lay larvae, their own eggs and their own larvae into the flea beetle larvae, and that's how they complete the end of their life cycle. So by controlling the flea beetle larvae in your crop, you're using the beneficial insects to the best effect. And then improving crop nutrition, as I talked about in the previous slide, anything you can do to improve the crop's nutrition through the autumn and into the spring will help. So by growing fast-growing legumes, typically a Bursian clover, you get the crop. It captures a bit of nutrition itself, but it also produces its own nitrogen for its own use. It's then controlled through the season, and then in the spring releases that nitrogen back to the oilseed rape crop at that very crucial spring growth stage. So you get a bit of a fertiliser boost, especially if you can't get on because of cold or wet conditions. And then lastly, as Charlie alluded to, there's autumn vigour. Variety vigour has been talked about for a long time. As you can see here, we've got Flamingo on the right, which is one of our offerings from KWS. This you can see to a line versus the competitor conventional variety next door. This autumn vigour gets the crop to that crucial 3/4 true leaf stage before the adults migrate into the crop. They can cope with that early adult grazing, and by being able to cope with that, they can then carry on to a successful crop. But I'll leave you to talk to David Waite, who's our regional seed manager, about more varieties and more options that we have.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to begin by asking three questions about oilseed rape, or more in particular, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself three questions about growing oilseed rape on your farm. The first question is, has your farm got a problem with volunteer hyrusic acid oilseed rape, for example, or charlock or runch weed seeds? Second question is, does your oilseed rape show symptoms of turnip yellow virus? And the third and final question is, does your farm or does your growing of oilseed rape have a history or show evidence of stunted plants with root galls? If you're in the fortunate position of being able to answer no to all of these questions, then you can select your variety purely on its agronomic merit, and that is a combination of its yield and agronomic factors. So answering the first question, if you do have a problem with volunteer oilseed rape or with the troublesome weeds charlock and runch, we now have new technology from BASF in the form of Clearfields. And this technology allows you to control all of these troublesome weeds and the volunteers in the growing crop. Clearfield varieties grow and appear exactly the same as any conventional oilseed rape variety. The crop is grown in the normal manner, but is subsequently treated with a post-emergence Clearfield herbicide. Several varieties are available, but some of the best currently to choose from would be LG Constructor, DK Imprint, and Plurax. You'll note that all three of these varieties are recognised by the suffix in their name CL, which obviously stands for Clearfields. If you've seen or your agronomist sees symptoms of turnip yellow virus in your oilseed rape crop, we now have a selection of varieties that have a genetic tolerance or resistance to the turnip yellow virus built in. Two varieties that would be probably top of the pile for these are both candidates for the 2021 AHDB recommended list, and both sit there as some of the highest yielding candidates. The first one to mention is LG Antigua. LG Antigua has excellent yield potential at 107% of control. It obviously contains the turnip yellow virus resistance and pod shatter resistance, which is becoming increasingly common in hybrid oilseed rape varieties. But it also possesses excellent FOMA and good light leaf spot resistance. Stiff stems and good autumn and spring vigour are also exhibited in this variety. The second variety that has turnip yellow virus that I want to mention is another new variety called Voltage. Again, a candidate variety that sits there with 108% of control on AHDB trials. Strong autumn vigour is again present in this variety along with its turnip yellow virus resistance and an excellent light leaf spot rating. FOMA, however, on Voltage will require a little bit of attention. My final question that you asked yourself was, do you have a history of oilseed rape having clubroot or showing clubroot symptoms in your crop? Approximately 18 years ago, a German breeder brought a variety of Mendel to the market. This was the first variety to have the genetic tolerance or resistance to clubroot. But in the early days, there was quite a significant yield gap between Mendel and the standard varieties. However, if you had a bad infestation or a history of clubroot, you could get approximately or anything towards a 50% yield loss. So it was still a viable option. 18 years fast forward and we saw Crocodile CR added to the recommended list in autumn 2019. Again, Crocodile possesses the same genetic tolerance and resistance to clubroot, but is now the highest yielding variety available with clubroot tolerance. It's a clear 3% ahead of its competitor varieties in AHDB trials, and it was the first clubroot variety to be added with a yield resistance within 3% of the highest yielding conventional varieties available. So if you're in the fortunate position of not having any of these potentially troublesome diseases to deal with, and you prefer to grow a conventional variety, I've highlighted three of the most popular double low conventional oilseed rape varieties available. Firstly, Acacia was added to the recommended list last autumn, so new for the 2020-21 season. It's the highest yielding potential variety available in recommended list trials. Obviously, in this category, we're talking about open pollinated varieties, but it does have very stiff stems and above average disease resistance. A variety that's a couple of years old now, called Ballard, has performed consistently very well for the last few seasons. It has above average oil content and a good all-round disease resistance package. From the same stable as Ballard, and just a year before, a variety called Flamingo was brought to market, and this has one of the best light leaf spot resistances available in all varieties that we're seeing at the moment. Flamingo in recent years has been shown to have some of the best tolerances to verticillium wilt, which again is a soil-borne fungus that there is no post-treatment control of. And finally, if you prefer a hybrid varieties, which a lot of people do for many good reasons these days, I've just highlighted two hybrid varieties from the DK stable. DK Expansion was first added to the recommended list in 2019 and is now probably the most widely grown hybrid in the market today. A very safe choice and a worthy successor to the still popular DK Extrovert. Good FOMA resistance comes from the RLM7 gene, which is increasingly appearing in varieties today, and again, good pod shatter resistance from this hybrid. Following behind DK Expansion, a new variety from the DK stable called DK Expectation. This is a very vigorous new hybrid, and probably the next in line in this very strong breeding stable. RLM7 comes again in expectation to give you good FOMA and the good pod shatter resistance, which we're coming to expect as standard. DK expectation also has a good light leaf spot resistance. Thank you for listening and watching this video. We hope you found it useful and thought-provoking in helping you make a decision about what variety of rape you should grow and how you might attempt to control some of the problems that we're faced with oilseed rape. We'd love to have any feedback and any questions that you have. Please let us know in the comments or get in touch with us directly via your farm trader or your farm agronomist. Thank you for watching.